There is a small island in the Aegean Sea, about 30 miles off the coast of Turkey, where something strange happens to people. They forget to die. Not metaphorically, statistically. Men on this island reach the age of 90 at 2.5 times the rate of American men. The rate of cardiovascular disease is half that of the United States. Cancer rates are dramatically lower. And perhaps, most remarkably, dementia, the condition that affects nearly half of all Americans who reach 85, is almost entirely absent. The island is called Ikaria. It has a population of around 8,000 people. It has no traffic lights, no McDonald's, no pharmacy on every corner. When Dan Buettner and his team from National Geographic arrived to document the island in 2009, they expected to find the usual blue zone variables: diet, exercise, social connection. What they found instead was something that did not fit neatly into any existing framework. The Ikarians were not doing anything that looked like a health protocol. They were sleeping late, drinking wine in the afternoon, taking naps after lunch, staying up until midnight with neighbors, eating whatever grew on the hillside, and they were outliving almost everyone else on Earth. In the next 12 minutes, you're going to understand exactly why. 3 practices that researchers from the University of Athens spent years trying to document. And at the end, I will tell you the one element of Ikarian life that the wellness industry has never managed to package and sell. The one that turns out to be the most biologically significant of all. When researchers began systematically studying the Ikarian population, they were working with data that did not make sense by conventional standards. Here was a population eating a diet high in olive oil, wild greens, legumes, and goat's milk cheese. Moderate red wine, very little meat, almost no processed food. Not because of a dietary philosophy, but because the island was isolated enough that processed food simply never arrived in significant quantities until recently. The EPIC study, the European Prospective Investigation into Cancer and Nutrition, tracked dietary patterns across 10 European countries and more than 500,000 participants over decades. The data consistently showed that populations closest to a traditional Mediterranean diet pattern had significantly lower rates of cardiovascular disease, cancer, and all-cause mortality. Ikaria sat at the extreme end of that spectrum. Not a modified Mediterranean diet, the original. The way people ate in the Greek islands before supermarkets existed. But the diet alone did not explain the dementia numbers, and it did not explain why Ikarian men specifically were surviving into their 90s at rates that made researchers question their own data. The answer required looking at 3 specific practices that distinguished Ikaria not just from the Western world, but from every other blue zone on Earth. The first practice is built around a category of food that grows wild across the Ikarian hillsides and has been consumed there daily for centuries. Wild mountain herbs, not as seasoning, as medicine, as daily ritual. Ikarian elders drink herbal teas every single day. Not commercial herbal tea from a supermarket shelf. Teas brewed from plants they pick themselves or buy from local gatherers. Wild rosemary, sage, oregano, mint, artemisia, and most importantly, wild mountain tea made from the sideritis plant, known locally as shepherd's tea. A 2013 study published in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease tested sideritis extract on cognitive function in older adults. The researchers found significant improvements in memory and attention compared to placebo. The mechanism runs through multiple channels simultaneously. The polyphenols in sideritis inhibit acetylcholinesterase, the enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine. the neurotransmitter most directly linked to memory. This is the same enzyme that Alzheimer's medications like donepezil target. The difference is that sideritis does it gently, daily, over decades, not pharmaceutically, in a crisis. Wild rosemary and sage contain rosmarinic acid and carnosic acid, compounds documented to reduce neuroinflammation and protect neurons from oxidative damage. Oregano contains carvacrol, one of the most potent natural antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory compounds identified in plant research. The Ikarians were not aware of any of this. They drank these teas because their grandmothers had, and because the plants grew everywhere and the habit cost nothing. But the cumulative effect of consuming these compounds daily for 70 or 80 years is a level of neuroprotection that no pharmaceutical protocol has yet managed to replicate. The practical version is accessible to anyone. A daily cup of sage or rosemary tea, not the dried powder in a commercial bag, but loose dried herbs steeped in hot water for 5 to 10 minutes. The active compounds are heat-soluble and extract easily. This is not exotic. It costs almost nothing. And the evidence for its effect on cognitive aging is among the most consistent in the plant medicine literature. Give it 30 days of daily use before you judge anything. The effects on cognitive clarity are not dramatic in the short term. They are cumulative. That is precisely how they work. This is 30% of the Ikarian system. The second practice is where the research became genuinely surprising. When the research team began looking at what specifically protected Ikarian cardiovascular health, they found something they had not expected to find in a longevity study. The answer was olive oil. But not in the way most people think about olive oil. The average Ikarian consumes approximately 6 tablespoons of olive oil per day, not as a condiment, as the primary fat source in virtually every meal. Cooked into legumes, poured over wild greens, used to preserve vegetables, consumed in quantities that would make any Western nutritionist nervous. A 2013 study published in the New England Journal of Medicine, the pre-DIME trial, followed 7,400 adults at high cardiovascular risk over nearly 5 years. The group assigned to a Mediterranean diet, supplemented with extra virgin olive oil, had a 30% lower rate of major cardiovascular events compared to the low-fat control group. The trial was so conclusive, it was stopped early because withholding olive oil from the control group was considered unethical. The mechanism runs through oleocanthal, a compound in fresh extra virgin olive oil that inhibits the same inflammatory enzymes as ibuprofen, through the same molecular pathway, but without the gastrointestinal side effects of chronic NSAID use. It also runs through oleic acid, which reduces LDL oxidation, the process that makes cholesterol dangerous, and through a complex of polyphenols that activate the same cellular repair pathways as caloric restriction. But here is what matters about how Ikarians consume olive oil compared to how most of the Western world does. They use fresh, locally pressed extra virgin olive oil that is never more than a few months old. The polyphenol content of fresh olive oil is dramatically higher than the olive oil that sits in a supermarket bottle for 12 to 18 months before being opened. By the time most people in the West consume olive oil, the most biologically active compounds have already degraded significantly. If you want to replicate the Ikarian practice, find the freshest extra virgin olive oil you can source. Look for a harvest date on the bottle, not just a best before date. Use it generously. 6 tablespoons sounds like a lot. Spread across a full day of cooking and finishing dishes. It is less than you think. If you are finding this useful, subscribe to Longevity Code. Every week we go this deep on one place, one person, one complete system. backed by real research, with protocols you can start this week. No supplements to sell, no products to push, just the code. We now have the foundation and the amplifier. What comes next is the element of Ikarian life that no researcher expected to find at the center of the longevity data. In the early years of studying the Ikarian population, researchers cataloged the obvious variables: diet, physical activity, social connection. All of those told part of the story. But one behavioral pattern kept appearing in the data with a consistency that eventually became impossible to ignore. Ikarians nap. Not occasionally, not on weekends. Every day, after lunch, for 20 to 30 minutes. It is not laziness. It is not a cultural quirk. It is a biological practice that the research has now documented with enough precision to understand exactly what it does inside the human body. A 2007 study published in the Archives of Internal Medicine followed more than 23,000 Greek adults over 6 years. The people who napped regularly at least 3 times per week for at least 30 minutes had a 37% lower risk of dying from cardiovascular disease compared to non-nappers. 37% from a nap. The mechanism involves cortisol. In the natural human cortisol rhythm, levels peak in the morning and decline through the day. By early afternoon, cortisol is dropping and the body is in a window of lower arousal. Fighting that window, pushing through the afternoon on caffeine and stimulation, keeps cortisol artificially elevated. Chronically elevated afternoon cortisol is directly linked to cardiovascular inflammation, immune suppression, and accelerated cellular aging. The nap does not just rest the brain, it completes the cortisol cycle. It allows inflammatory markers that rise during the morning to reset before the evening. It reduces the chronic low-grade stress load that accumulates in a body that never fully decompresses during the day. Ikarians also have a relationship with time that has no equivalent in the Western world. The island runs on what locals call Ikarian time. Meals happen when people are hungry. Sleep happens when people are tired. Social gatherings extend as long as they are enjoyable. There are no hard stops, no alarm clock urgency, no performance anxiety around productivity. This is not simply pleasant. It is biologically protective. The chronic time pressure of modern Western life, the permanent low-grade urgency of deadlines, schedules, and notifications, is one of the most consistent drivers of elevated cortisol in the population data. The Ikarians have structurally removed it from their lives in a way that no supplement can replicate. At the beginning of this video, I told you I would reveal the one element of Ikarian life that the wellness industry has never managed to package. It is not the herbal tea, it is not the olive oil, it is not even the nap, though the nap matters more than most people realize. It is this. In Ikaria, there is no word for retirement. Not because they have no word for stopping work, because the concept of separating your useful years from your useless years does not exist in the way it does in the Western world. Ikarian farmers do not retire and then wait. They reduce, they slow down. They hand off the harder physical tasks, but they remain embedded in the productive life of the community until they physically cannot. A 90-year-old in Ikaria still tends a small garden, still feeds the animals, still opens the door when a neighbor knocks, still has a role that requires their presence every single day. The biological consequences of this are now well documented. A 2014 study in Psychological Science found that a strong sense of purpose, what researchers measured as feeling that your daily activities have meaning, was associated with a significantly lower risk of death over a 14-year follow-up period. The effect was independent of diet, exercise, and social connection. Purpose protects through its own biological pathway, reducing inflammatory signaling and activating cellular maintenance mechanisms that idle when a person has nothing meaningful to do. The centenarians of Ikaria did not build a purpose practice. They never stopped having one. Think about the last time you felt genuinely needed, not appreciated, needed. The kind of needed where something would not happen if you were not there. That feeling is not just psychological. It is anti-inflammatory. It is cellular. It shows up in your blood markers. The system is 3 things. Tier 1. A daily cup of wild herbal tea, sage, rosemary, or mountainside varieties, steeped for at least 5 minutes. The neuroprotection is cumulative and begins immediately. Tier 2. Fresh extra virgin olive oil as your primary fat, 6 tablespoons per day across all your cooking. Find the freshest source you can. Tier 3. Protect your sense of purpose. Do not retire from everything at once. Keep one role, one responsibility, one thing that needs you every day. Your action today is simple. Tonight, steep a cup of dried sage or rosemary in hot water for 5 minutes. Drink it after dinner. That is Tier 1, Day 1. And tomorrow afternoon, after lunch, give yourself 20 minutes of intentional rest. Do not call it lazy. Call it what Ikarian research says it is: cardiovascular protection. Subscribe to Longevity Code. Every week, one place, one person, one practice, the world's longest living people have been using for generations. And the science that finally explains why it works. Sardinia, Okinawa, Nicoya, Loma Linda. We are just getting started. Leave me one comment. When was the last time you took a real nap, not falling asleep on the sofa by accident, but an intentional 20 minutes in the afternoon? Because according to the data, that answer says more about your cardiovascular health than most people realize.